Did you get what you wanted?
Good evening. We'd like to go ahead and get started. We're starting a little bit late. In case you haven't noticed, we've got some bad weather. We've got a lot of demonstrators out around Marietta Square, and we have a low showing of our representatives tonight. I think we have 21 from Cobb County who were all invited, and we currently have 2 of you here and hope to have more. So tonight, this event is brought about by 4 different organizations, and I'd like to start with asking each of those organizations to give us a few words about their organization. So could we start with the League of Women Voters of Marietta Cobb, please?
Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Melville. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of Marietta Cobb. My co-president is Carla McManus. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. I would like to stress that the League of Women Voters is nonpartisan. Even though we are political, we never support a political party. We never support a political candidate. I welcome all of you here tonight, and I am particularly pleased that we have 3 other organizations joining us in this endeavor. Thank you.
I'd like to ask the American Association of University Women to please give us a couple comments.
Good evening. My name is Yetta McMillan, and I'm the Vice President of the American Association of University Women, the Cobb branch, also known as AAUW. We are a nonpartisan organization as well. We've been in existence since 1881. We have over 170 members and supporters that span cities, virtual communities, as well as college campuses. Our mission is to advance equity for women and girls through advocacy, education, philanthropy, and research. One of our primary projects that we use to facilitate our mission is our book fair. We have an annual book fair, and the proceeds from that book fair provides scholarships for young girls, as well as women making transition into a second career. That's just one of the many projects that we support, as well as financially back. And we just thank you for having us as a part of the forum this evening, and thank you for having us this evening. Thank you for your time.
And now if we could please hear from the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, the Rho Zeta Omega chapter, please.
That's not his.
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Sarah Elaine Jones. I'm the president of Rho Zeta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. This has actually become an annual event for us, and thank you again for inviting us. We love partnering with you for this particular project. Rho Zeta Omega chapter has been in the Marietta Cobb County community for 27 years this year. Our organization, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, was actually founded by African American women on the campus of Howard University in 1908 with the motto of service to all mankind. And in keeping with that motto, Rho Zeta Omega provides many programs and services as well as activities for our community. Just last year alone, we provided services to over 8,000 residents here in the Cobb County area. We actually enjoy partnering with other organizations such as the League of Women Voters and other civic organizations as well as educational institutions to provide those services. Our international president, Dorothy Buchanan Wilson, her administration, their theme this year and for the next 3 years is launching new dimensions of services, and that's exactly what we do. We provide services not only to senior citizens and to our young, but everyone in between. And we're just looking forward to a wonderful year. And again, thank you for allowing us to be here this evening.
And so you've heard we have a new sponsor for this annual event, and that is the East Cobb Council of PTA. So if I could ask them to please say a few words.
Thank you very much. My name is Ann Davidson. I'm the president for the East Cobb County Council of PTAs. Thank you all for including us. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for including us in this event. We feel very distinguished to be among such, or we feel very honored to be among such distinguished company. Thank you to our legislators for the work that you do. We appreciate your service to our citizens and your dedication to our community. The East Cobb County Council of PTAs is made up of 35 schools. It's part of the National PTA and part of the Georgia PTA. We have over 28,000 members. Our volunteers are in the schools every day trying to improve and enrich the academic experience for our students. As you may know, the PTA was founded over 100 years ago as an advocacy organization for children. We still do that today. We thank our legislators for their efforts, and we look forward to working with you and with our community partners to improve education and the high quality of academic success for our students and our communities. Thank you.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started with our program. My name is Gloria Beauchesne, and I'm with the League of Women Voters of Marietta Cobb. What we're going to do tonight is ask each of you to take a couple minutes to give us some introductory comments about yourself. And then we have questions from the audience. These have been submitted on index cards to me, and we'll continue to collect those throughout the evening. My job is to try and combine those, consolidate them into questions to not be repetitive. And in answering those questions, we will start with Dr. Rhett, and then the next answer we will ask Ms. Thomas to be the first to respond. And then we'd like to give each of you a couple minutes for some closing remarks. So with that, let's start with you, Dr. Rhett, on a couple minutes of opening comments from each of you, please.
Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing this evening? Rhett, just like Rhett Butler, that's how you pronounce my last name. I don't quite look like him, but I like to think I do care. That's why I ran for office. Represent District 33, Marietta, Powder Springs, parts of Austell and Mableton. Was sworn in for the first time yesterday, and that was a great experience. Was an educator for 22 years and retired, and I'm a member of the United States Air Force Reserve. I currently manage personnel for the Pilot and Navigator School out here at Dobbins Air Reserve Base. I have 10 more months left, and then it's mandatory retirement. For the past 2 years, I was doing adult education where I was working in the city of Atlanta, where I was working with women who've been battered or abused or lost their homes and jobs. And my job was to come up with a curriculum to help them learn personal finance, personal development, computer skills, find housing for them, child care, open up a bank account. And I really enjoyed that. But the contract expired. But right now, I'm dedicating most of my time moving forward to serving the citizens of District 33. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, please.
All right. Of course, my name is Erica Thomas, and I represent District 39, which is Mableton, Austell, a little bit of Smyrna, and a pinch of Powder Springs. I'm 27 years old, and I ran for office at 26. It was a very exciting thing to do. It was something that I've wanted to do. I started a nonprofit organization called Speak Out Loud in 2012, and what we do is we help foster children to be successful. We teach them things, of course, like Dr. Rett was saying, how to open a bank account, how to fold clothes, how to wash clothes. I mean, pretty much anything that people don't know that a lot of kids that age out of the foster system really don't know how to do. I was an age out foster kid, so that's really why I know that some of these skills are things that we didn't learn, and I had to teach myself how to be able to do. So I said once I learned these things, I was going to make sure that any foster child that I ran into knew how to be stable and didn't have to go through the same things that I went through. Also, I actually wrote a children's book, and so it'll be published in February. I'm excited about that. It's about a foster care kid girl. Her name is Erica, of course. And just really trying to introduce the world to the life of a foster child, and that they're not all bad. They're not all ADD. You know, a lot of kids are very smart. One child that I'm mentoring right now, she has a 4.23 GPA, and she's she's going to have a full ride to any school that she wants to go to. And I've just been encouraging her all the way through, and she inspired me to write the book to show America that kids that are in foster care aren't all bad, and that in this book, the girl, she goes through a lot, but you know, at night she has these grand adventures that she goes on, and shows that she has a really good life despite the things that she's going through during the day. So that's just a little bit about me, and that's you.
Mr. Setzler, if we could hear from you, please.
Thank you. State Representative Ed Setzler, represent Northwest Cobb County, the communities of Ackworth and Kennesaw. Was not quite as young as Representative Thomas when I got elected, but almost. Been serving since first being elected in 2004. One of my goals is candidly to maintain the energy and the enthusiasm that first-year members have. One of the reasons I ran in the first place was to have a clear-minded and responsive voice for our community, that regular folks really ought to matter, and that we needed people who took a citizen's perspective, to be focused on principle, never waver, but recognize the practicalities of getting things done in state government on behalf of our people requires both managing common sense, the practical approach to solving our most important problems, while really never taking your eye off principle of what's right and what will really stand the test of time. My goals this session, as with every session, are to go back to the same three basics and spend my time on the important things, which for a free society and a successful state is education, infrastructure, and sound governance. Ensuring that we spend our time on the priorities that really have an impact in people's lives, and do that in a way that's both relevant, principle-centered, and focused on really the long term. Making decisions that 40, 50 years from now will bear out as being good decisions. That's really our charge in everything that we do. So that's my goal this session, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. We do appreciate your coming, as we do the audience and our at-home audience as well. In that respect, I wanted to ask the audience present tonight to please respect the time of these legislators, and when the program is over, to please let them leave rather than, you don't mind that comment, do you? Okay, great. All right, so let's get started. And the first question I don't really understand, so I hope you all can help me with this. And those of you who are new in the legislature even. This question is that Representative Teasley from Cobb County is implementing a religious freedom bill. I think that's what was going on the square in the rain tonight, that it had something to do with religious freedom. So if we could start with you, please, Dr. Rett. Do you know anything about this, or would we do better to pass this to Mr. Setzler? Mr. Setzler, please, if you know anything about this religious freedom bill, please let us know.
I do. It's something that have had the opportunity. I was able to attend a conference a couple of years ago on religious liberties, people from multiple faiths coming together to make sure that people of all religious backgrounds are able to have their freedoms protected. The bill that Representative Teasley has been modified and narrowed since last year, but the bill that he's filing is a bill that then Congressman Chuck Schumer passed in 1993 in the United States Congress, which provides a very basic level of protection for religious freedoms. For 200 years in our country, the courts always provided very strong protections to religious liberties. But in the early 1990s, in response to a peyote case where an Indian tribe in southwestern states were asserting they could take psychedelic drugs as part of a religious practice, it created some chaos in the courts. And the courts came out and said, hey, if the legislature wants to prescribe certain protections like this, the legislature needs to act. It can no longer just kind of fall into the blanket protections of the Constitution. So in 1993, the United States Congress, in a near unanimous act, passed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which provides a basic blanket of protection that if the government's going to impact your religious freedoms, there needs to be for a compelling reason, and they need to do it in a way that's least restrictive and least impactful on your religious freedoms. For example, we can get into lots of examples of that. The courts have said, though, that applies to federal installations and to federal law, but it does not apply to state and local law. That if states want to provide protections on people's basic religious liberties from local government entities or state government entities, the states need to each pass their own bill that would mirror the federal bill. In spite of a lot of perhaps demagoguery you might have heard, 30 states have those protections. The federal government, the military has those protections. But the state of Georgia, because the courts have been so friendly to religious liberties over the decades, never got around to passing it. About 2 years ago, Representative Teasley recognized with some others, it's time we need to put these things in place. The idea that students who have their Bible open in a public school cafeteria during their lunch hour. There have been cases where students have been told to put their Bible away and not read the Bible. That's not allowable. Or kids that have Jesus on their shirt have been told, you can't wear that. Well, in fact, it's not protecting and respectful of one's religious liberty to say that a kid can read a Shakespeare book in the cafeteria but can't read a Bible. It's censoring based on content. So there's no law in place today in Georgia to protect people from reading the Bible in school on their own time and those kinds of things that just seem like common sense to us. Those protections exist in an employment setting. Federal civil rights law protects that. It's present in a housing setting. Federal Fair Housing Act protects that. It's present in a public accommodation setting. You can't discriminate based on race, sex, background, those kinds of things in a public accommodation setting. But outside of those settings that are specifically protected by civil rights law, other areas are not protected, and there's really no protections from state and local government. So Representative Teasley's bill seeks simply to do that. And I'll leave it at that and take some more questions if there are some.
Great. Thank you very much. We appreciate that information. Let's go to some education questions, and we'll go back starting with Dr. Rhett. And this first question is, what are your thoughts on whether education should be publicly funded? And tell us why you think yes or no.
Well, it's currently publicly funded.
Pardon?
Could you repeat that question?
Should education be publicly funded? Why yes or no?
Well, quite frankly, the way it's funded now, I don't really see much of a problem with it. It's just as long as there's some sort of an equalization process where each school receives adequate funding and meet their specific needs. There's been some cases where some schools have a little bit of an advantage because they have a strong PTA and they can supplement what goes on in their local school, but currently I have no real problem with it.
Thank you. And Ms. Thomas, if we could have your thoughts on whether education should be publicly funded.
Well, I do believe that education should be publicly funded. Of course, there's a lot of kids that need the public funds, in order to be in school every day. So, of course, I do believe that the education should be publicly funded.
Thank you. And to you, Mr. Setzler?
I do, and here's why. Folks have it's sort of trendy nowadays to question the idea of public funding for K-12 education. And I'll tell you this, that in a modern society, let me back up. The purpose of government is to allow people to secure and enjoy their basic God-given rights. And everyone should be able to enjoy those equally. To do that, 200 years ago, in an agrarian culture, there wasn't the imperative then to have an 8th grade, 10th grade, 12th grade education to be successful, to operate in the marketplace, raise a family, have a farm, and live a peaceable life. I can tell you today, though, as the Industrial Revolution kind of emerged through the 1900s, and certainly today, one can't be free without an education. One can't be a self-directed person that can provide for themselves, make decisions in a free society and in a democratic republic like ours. So to have free, self-governing, capable people, one has to have an education. And if they're a child, perhaps, whose parents didn't have the resources to do that, we as a government, its jobs to provide, to allow folks to secure and enjoy basic rights for themselves. Without an education, the idea of liberty and the idea of being free just doesn't really exist. It's just an idea. So public education, I think, is essential that all kids might have the opportunity to be productive, self-supporting, self-governing, free citizens. And without an education, one really can't be free. They really become captive to their circumstances and dependent upon others. So I think public education, K-12, is, for that reason, just essential that it be publicly supported.
Thank you for that.
I was just going to add to that, traveling around the world in the military, you come to find out that education is not afforded to many. Matter of fact, they're very discreet on who they allow to get education because it's a way of keeping people in their current situation. When you come over to this country, no matter what your background is, with the current educational system, you have an opportunity to transform your life, whether, you could just look at some of our presidents who came from log cabins. But without that education, in a lot of countries, if your lot is on a lower socioeconomic level, your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren will never cross that divide because you won't have access to education. But the way we have it here, no matter if you come from a different country or don't know the language, or if you come from adverse situations, that education gives everybody an opportunity and a foundation to try and transform their life and move forward and participate in the American dream. One of the things I always, as an educator, I used to always talk about is one of the problems in education, sometimes children don't necessarily have a frame of reference as to how important it is until after they graduate and go out into the market. I remember as a kid, when I graduated from high school, I went to a community college and I was living with my parents, and I had 2 jobs. One job I was working in the kitchen, the other one I was cleaning bathrooms. And one night I had a nightmare, and I said to myself, can I imagine doing this the rest of my life? Would you like some fries with that shake, ma'am? Or cleaning toilets every day for the rest of my life? And also at the same time, my father made me pay rent. Plus I had a curfew and I had to be home at 11 o'clock. I finally figured out why it was important for me to study, so I studied real hard and then went on to complete my education. But thank you.
Thank you. We have another education-related question. What changes in the Hope Scholarship would you propose? So if we could start with you, Ms. Thomas.
Well, I think the Hope Scholarship is a really, really great asset to higher education, and I really love the Hope Scholarship. I would say that one thing that I would add to the Hope Scholarship is really making sure that we give the adequate amount of funds to families that don't have the money to be able to put their kids in school. I'm not exactly sure about how they go about doing that, but what I do know is that, you have a lot of kids that aren't getting the Hope Scholarship that really, really need it. And I would love to see, making sure that people that make a lot of money, and get the Hope Scholarship and they could put their kids through school. I would love to see kids that don't have the money, that have the GPA, to be able to get that scholarship, and opposed to the people that can afford it.
And please, Mr. Setzler.
If there's any question in the effectiveness of the Hope Scholarship, the last 20, going in when it was created in the early 1990s, the last 20 years should have wiped clean any question. it has had an enormous impact, not just on individuals, but as a state. Formerly, before the Hope was passed, 70% of kids who made higher than 1200 on the SAT went to schools other than our state institutions. Now 75% of our top students with an over 1200 SAT go to our state institutions here in Georgia. So in terms of retaining talent, the Hope's been enormously successful. In doing that, one thing it's done, I think it's an unintended consequence, it has really had a massive effect of shaping decisions for high school students around the incentives that Hope creates for having GPA to get the Hope Scholarship, or now a 3.7 GPA for the Zell Miller Scholarship. Some of the incentives Hope creates is that unless a kid's taking an AP course, an on-level class and an honors class is weighted the same way for Hope. So students who are thinking, I want to get the Hope Scholarship, I'd really like to get the Zell Miller, the incentives set up by Hope as it exists today incentivize a student to take an on-level class versus an honors class. The points they get in an on-level class are scored exactly the same as an honors class, which has more homework, more challenging tests, cover more material. In fact, it's even a different curriculum under the state standards. If I could change anything about the Hope Scholarship today, I would create incentives by weighting honors classes higher than on-level courses. Because currently there's a perverse incentive to take just on-level courses, get a very high GPA, get into the University of Georgia, get into Georgia Tech, and not challenge yourself as much as you could in high school. I think those perverse incentives are disincentivizing our kids to take the most challenging classes in high school, and I think that works against us as a state.
Thank you for that information. Dr. Rett, your thoughts, please?
I would like to see them open up more of an opportunity for those who have a technical or vocational pursuit to have access to the Hope Scholarship. One of the things that I noticed as an educator is there was a period of time there during No Child Left Behind where we were gearing the curriculum as if all the students were going to attend college. And that's not necessarily the case. And just because you don't go to college, that doesn't mean that you're not as bright as the other students. We have a saying in the Air Force, you have to have a college degree to sit in the cockpit, but with a high school diploma, you can put the plane together and assure that it flies. Who's smarter? And I remember as an educator, I had one student, he kind of gave the teachers some problems. He never really messed with me that much. I would get after him about turning in his homework. And he took the end of course 8th grade CRT exam, and he passed every area with flying colors. I was like, wow, you're going to high school. He said, no, I'm not. He says he wanted to work with his family in their business where they do a lot of landscaping. And I thought to myself, if we would have had a stronger vocational track in the school system and connected with that Hope Scholarship where we provide more scholarship monies for those who have that technical vocational track, he might have hung in there. Plus, you think about it, when we talk about labor and people bringing different people in to try and do certain type of vocational skills, why not train our own here in Georgia so that way we can keep them here once they learn. That way, when we say made in Georgia, it'll have a different meaning.
Thank you. I think we are starting with you, Mr. Setzler, on this question. We've had a couple more education questions come in. Would you like to see physical education be mandatory, and how do you feel about music and art education?
I think the priority for physical education being mandatory needs to be at the lower grades. There's currently a requirement to take a half-class PE, half-class health to graduate high school. And I think there's a need there. I might change the way it's implemented. I don't think it's very well implemented at the high school level. I think it tends to be kids running to a gymnasium, getting to play basketball or volleyball on their own, as opposed to a structured, fitness-oriented set of not just skills but abilities that can really carry you through life, and beginning to build a lifelong fitness regime. I think that's what high school PE needs to look like. But I do think kids at every level ought to have a half hour of PE a day, if possible, maybe as few as 3 days a week. But I think daily is important. I think one of the things that I've seen become a challenge and candidly become more difficult since we've started to implement more accountability in all the grades and testing and holding teachers accountable to test standards. Well, that's important. I think when you put pressure on a system, I think there's a tendency that because there's higher accountability, there's less of an emphasis on PE and things that get kids active throughout the day. So I would really focus my efforts on, in the lower grades, really from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade, having 30 minutes of PE a day, focused not just on team sports, but on at least 3 days a week of aerobic activity, trying to get kids that the kind of exercise that increasingly they're not getting at home. And at the high school level, focus on giving kids the understanding and skills to put in place a lifelong fitness regimen, both from a dietary perspective and from a fitness perspective, to make them as healthy of adults as they possibly can be. A lot of kids, if they don't get it at school, they're never going to get it. And I think setting kids on a glide path, entering adulthood with a good fitness set of habits, can have a huge impact long term for us.
And how about music and art education?
That's a complicated question. I think they ought to be optional. I didn't have a great music education growing up, and I regret that now as an adult. But in terms of the priorities, I think kids ought to be able to make a choice around that. I do think there ought to be exposure. Most kids at younger grades get exposure. Then by the time they're halfway through middle school, aren't really getting any. I think a music or an art class from 7th grade to 12th grade, I think, is an important part of an education. But I don't really have a comprehensive policy approach on how to address that.
Thank you. Your thoughts, please, Dr. Rhett.
I think those things are important because it provides exposure for our youth who might not either get that exposure. Then as a part of also, one of the things about education is you're supposed to not only teach the 3 R's, which are essential, but also exposure and round out character. I remember, it's interesting, one of my jobs in the Air Force is to manage fitness. And it's interesting how I have to teach grown people the importance between exercise and diet and how they perform and how it'll affect their overall health. Those are things that should be taught when a person is young, when they're in school. And when it came to music, I remember being exposed to playing in a steel drum band and playing some calypso music. It broadened my perspective and also put me in touch with a different group of people that I would have never been exposed to. When it comes to art, I remember learning a valuable lesson when I was in art. I thought I made a mistake, and my art teacher told me, "Son, there's no such thing as a mistake in art." And I said, "Ma'am, what do you mean?" She said she took the paintbrush, said a few strokes here and a few strokes there, and look, the picture, you have a whole different picture. And she said, "I want you to remember that as a metaphor for life. Sometimes you may make a mistake, but if you hang in there and keep trying and put a few different strokes, before you know it, you can move on and turn your life around." So it helped me to develop character. And just like when I ran for office, the first time I ran for dog catcher, and I lost to a cat named Morris. Second time I ran, I lost to the Honorable Lisa Cupid. But I took that paintbrush out, and I kept trying. And then all of a sudden, I had to pinch myself yesterday and say, wow. So that I'm in the Senate. So that exposure, is still with me today from the arts. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, please.
Well, I do believe that physical education is very, very important. I know a study that went out in 2012, 1/3 of adolescents and kids are obese. And that's just not overweight, but that's obese. And that's very scary because, we have to make sure that education is the key, but we have to keep our kids alive and keep them healthy so that they can have an education. So I think it's very important that we make sure that kids are getting the 30 minutes of working out a day, or even if it's walking around the track, something that so they can keep motivated and know that this is a normal thing. So when they go into their adulthood, they'll keep it going, doing that 30 minutes. They might not do 30 minutes, but they might do 20 minutes, just keeping that habit. Also, when it comes to the arts, I think arts are very important. I don't know about making these things mandatory, but I know that it's very, very important to stimulate these children's mind. My 4-year-old, she's in piano. She also does tap, ballet, all of these things that help stimulate her mind. Mozart started at 4. So I said that to myself, I had to make sure that my child started early to stimulate her brain with these arts. And I think it's very important to not only start with 4-year-olds, but even K through 12 is very, very important that these kids are getting their arts.
Thank you. We have one more education question, and this has to do with our Forsyth representative has a proposal about appointing our state school superintendent versus the current system of election. And the AJC yesterday supposedly referenced that the State Board of Education would be elected by legislative caucuses. What do you think that means? Dr. Rett?
I think the people should have a say in that because it's reflective on how they feel. If you have a person appointing superintendent, they have a lot of control in terms of which direction they want the board to go, the school board to go, and that might not be reflective of what the people want. So I think the way it is currently, where you're elected, I think it'd be more reflective of the people's concerns.
Thank you. And Ms. Thomas?
Well, I'm from Tennessee, and in Tennessee, it is appointed, so it works for them. You know, but with my opinion, I do kind of agree with Dr. Rett that, you know, I do believe that it is the people's choice. And I think that the people should be able to elect the people that are going to be working for them and working for their children, because the kids are first and the parents are first as well, and they need to be able to know who is going to be working with their children. But at the same time, I do believe if that was the process, I'm pretty sure that the people would be involved in that process as well, if it was appointed.
In making this remark, it's not pointed at any one individual in particular, but our State Department of Education organizationally, if you looked at it purely organizationally, its design has organizational dysfunction to it. The state school board is appointed by the governor. The superintendent's elected by the people, but the superintendent directs just a core staff himself, in this case him or herself, and just 4 staffers. The staff within the department, though, all are accountable up to the state school board. Now, the superintendents, although they're elected by the people of Georgia, they don't have a direct reporting relationship to the staffers in the department. So you've got an entire staff of 800 employees that really are accountable to the board, but they're working for a superintendent that's directly elected. I mean, that in itself is I believe, creates organizational dysfunction. I think it's essential that our State Department be accountable to the voters. The question is, what is the mechanism by which they should be accountable to the voters? I believe there should be 1 or 2 models. One model should be we elect the governor. The governor appoints the superintendent of education, and the electoral buck stops with the governor. The governor appoints a board of education, as they do today, as the governor does for most other state agencies, and appoints a superintendent, so that the citizens of Georgia really can hold their governor accountable for what the State Department does. Alternately, I believe we should have an elected school board, that the members of our state board are elected by the citizens of Georgia. They appoint a superintendent, much like a local school board would be, and they run the State Department in a way that's consistent with clear reporting lines, responsibility. Every employee reports up to the superintendent. The superintendent would report to the board. And there's clear accountability, not the organizational dysfunction that I think we have in place today.
Thank you for those thoughts. Now we're going to move on to, we have a few questions on Medicaid and whether you plan to support legislation urging accepting Medicaid in Georgia. Supposedly 1.5 million people in our state do not have health care. They were told that they could not qualify, that they needed to apply for Medicare, and they don't have Medicare. So, sorry, we're talking about Medicaid, not Medicare. Sorry about that. So, what are your thoughts on Medicaid in the state of Georgia? And let's see, where are we now with Dr. Rett, please?
Well, I think we're going to have to take a close look at expansion in order to cover the number of people who don't have access to that. they can go to the emergency room, like some people suggest, even if they don't have coverage. But you know, who ultimately pays for that? You know, we the taxpayer will pay for that. So we have to figure out one way or another which way we want to eventually be the person who pays for the bill. Do we want to have a system in place where if they do need to go, they can get the adequate health care they need and the aftercare, or do we want them going back and forth to the emergency room, and then eventually if they aren't able to afford to pay for that bill, it falls back on the taxpayers. You know, one of the things we in the military, why we develop a comprehensive health care for the members of the military, because during the first Gulf War, when they called up a lot of reserves and guards and people in the Guard, they found out something. A lot of them didn't have adequate health care, and as a result, they had to be brought up to speed in terms of their health before we can send them off to war. You know, it's kind of hard to shoot at the enemy when your teeth are hurting. You know, it just doesn't go together. And as a result, we've done a better job at making sure that their health care is adequate. Also, one of the things we've gone to, that's one of the reasons why we've gone to a very strong fitness program in the military. Because many years ago, a lot of people smoked, drank, didn't eat the correct food, and didn't have adequate health care. And as a result, we not only ended up paying for their retirement, but we also ended up paying on top of that for their disability. So now we're paying them so that's a lot of money going out. So I think if you can provide adequate Medicaid so that they can be a little more proactive in taking care of their health, that would really go a long way in terms of cutting expenses.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, please.
Well, I do believe that every Georgian deserves health care. I mean, I believe that, you know, no one should be left behind when it comes to health care. It's very, very important. I think it's just as important as education and all the other things that we're fighting for. I do also believe that we need to make sure that we have a way to be able to pay for it and to fit it in the budget. I do believe that we do want, I would love to expand Medicaid. I would love to expand Medicaid, but I think that we need to go about a way that, you know, we can afford it in a way that we can make sure that every Georgian can have the health care.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to start by reminding folks that our SCHIP program, our State Children's Health Benefit Program, provides health coverage for children up to 235% of the federal poverty line, which is far above the Medicaid threshold. So when we talk about families and children are relatively inexpensive to provide health care for, and the SCHIP program provides that up to, again, 2.5 times the federal poverty level. So the Medicaid expansion issue really is one of adults. Special needs adults are covered through other special Medicaid waivers, Katie Beckett and others. So taking special needs people aside who have special waivers, setting aside children who are covered to a much higher threshold, it really becomes adults in that working class, lower working class range that we're talking about in terms of Medicaid expansion. I think it's certainly something we shouldn't be callous to, but I do think as we ask ourselves the questions, what kind of incentives are we creating? Are we creating incentives for folks to take the work that's available? Or are we creating incentives where the effective wage is driven down by providing more free services? If you think about providing, increasing the expanding Medicaid, what we're in essence doing in terms of incentives for folks to be involved in productive activity is that if you provide Medicaid for an additional population of working class people at no cost or at a minimal cost, the incentive is that if I don't work and I keep my income low, I get free health care. Versus if I work, take a second job, or work in a job that provides health care, the amount of money you make for putting in a 40-hour work week relative to not working at all is lessened. And that's not policy. I don't want that to sound like policy speak, but we've got to create incentives for folks to put in extra hours, to work, to maintain full-time employment, and we create disincentives to do that if we provide a free service for folks that aren't working. So I do believe we need to have a safety net. People who fall in hard times, we have a hospital provider fee where 1.45%, 1.5% of all hospital costs go into a pool to cover people who have uncompensated care. So if you do fall in hard times, you do have a catastrophic condition, that's been put in place by the legislature to make sure that you're not going to die without hospital care. But for basic care, creating an additional population of working class people that can access it for free creates a disincentive to work, and I think it has a perverse incentive on people becoming truly self-sufficient. Kids are covered under S-CHIP to a much higher level, but for those adults, we can't create perverse incentives against being involved in the marketplace, keeping their skills honed, and contributing in a meaningful way.
Thank you. We have another healthcare question. This relates to Medicaid as well. The concern is rural hospitals, and how can we help rural hospitals? And do you think that our lack of expansion for Medicaid actually hurt rural hospitals, contributed to their closing? So I think we're with you. Is that right, Ms. Thomas?
No, it's Dr.
Oh,
Ray. It's like this.
Or it might be, I think he was the first one.
I was trying to alternate who was first instead of having the same person be first every time. But it sounds like Mr. Setzler has some information on this since he's been in the legislature.
Could you ask the question again, please, ma'am?
Yeah, so the concern is rural hospitals, and how can we help them? And do you think our lack of Medicaid expansion actually contributed to rural hospitals closing?
It's a pretty complicated question. It's a good one. It's a very fair question. It's a complicated one. I don't know. I think each rural hospital has its own story. I think our answer long term is expanding real, meaningful urgent care facilities to rural Georgia. I don't know that every community can support an economically viable hospital. I think a lot of the hospitals that have existed back in a time when the population was less mobile. Folks couldn't get from community to community. It wasn't 30-minute drive you couldn't get 30 miles away to the next county in 30 minutes because the road networks weren't what they were today. I think the community hospitals that were created, many of them were really created in settings that long-term are not going to be sustainable. What I think we need to do as a state is ensure that we create urgent care facilities that can provide 90% of the care that's needed in our communities so that resources can be concentrated on rural hospitals, maybe a few less rural hospitals, but the rural hospitals that we do have are stronger. They can provide more of the complex services. Because I think, candidly, the issue that's created the challenge in rural hospitals as medicine has advanced, technology has become more expensive to afford. The things that hospitals are expected to have to be first-tier hospitals have become more and more expensive. And I think that makes it more difficult for rural hospitals to maintain their solvency. So I think our focus needs to be strong rural hospitals, perhaps fewer of them, and ensure each community has an urgent care setting where people can get stitches, people can be stabilized if there's a serious condition, and then be evac to a hospital that's economically viable. I don't know that as low as the Medicaid payments are, I don't know that Medicaid expansion by itself can make a hospital that's teetering on the edge of solvency be successful.
Thank you.
One of the
any thoughts?
intents of Obamacare was they cut a certain amount of funding to the hospitals with the hope that the expansion of Medicaid would make up for that. And because right now that's not happening, that has had an effect on a number of hospitals. We're going to have to take a closer look at that because when you're sick and you need some health care, you want to make sure there's a hospital that's open 24/7 and you don't have to drive 50 miles to try and get the care that you need. Those regional hospitals and those communities are our lifeline. So we're gonna have to take a real good look at how we fund them, because it's very important. I can't remember exactly, but I remember seeing in the news the other day where someone, well, I don't even want to quote it because I'm not sure, but I think that's important. That was the intent of Obamacare, and right now that's not happening, and that's affecting the funding of a lot of your smaller hospitals, and particularly in the agricultural area.
Any thoughts, Ms. Thomas? Okay. We just had another question come in about health care. Do you think that increasing the minimum wage for those who work 40 hours could make health care more affordable? Any takers on this one?
Well, I don't think, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I don't know if increasing someone's salary can necessarily equate to them having access to adequate health care, because when you look at some of these programs, when you look at the deductible, in some cases, if you make $1 more, does that mean you'll be able to meet your minimum deduction before you can get the care you need? I guess I'm pretty much trying to say I don't know if you can necessarily equate making $1 or $2 more means you'll have better or more adequate health care. But we just have to, just like he said over there, we have to take a closer look at trying to provide a balance, whereas we have certain nets in place to help those who don't necessarily have adequate access to the health care they need. But also, as I was saying, we need to look at the people who fall in that middle ground, whereas you don't make enough to necessarily have access to the covered safety nets we have in place, but you don't have a whole lot of money where you can necessarily meet those minimum deductions. So you have some people there in that gray area. So we'd have to take a little closer look at that.
I'll remind people it's tempting to ask government to insert itself in wage controls and those kinds of things, because it's tempting to say, hey, if we can just make everybody in the world earn at least $15 an hour, then wouldn't everything be great? The way we've got to discipline ourselves, though, as policymakers, is to see the seen and see the unseen. I don't know that every high schooler that goes and gets a job at Publix or at Kroger is really, in the marketplace, is really worth $10 or $12 an hour. What they put into their work, I'm not sure they command enough productivity to get that back. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Certainly some would, certainly some wouldn't. I think the question is, if we mandate a minimum wage, then what are the unintended consequences of that? If the consequence of that's going to be high schoolers are increasingly not hired until they're 18 or until they're 20 or 21, then what impact does that have on our culture of kids growing up and never having a high school job? As an employer, I'm not going to, if I can't get $10 or $12 an hour out of an employee, I'm certainly not going to give them a chance to work a job for me. What does it do for the service sector? It's extraordinary to me, if I'm coming back from a business trip and I'm in rural Georgia and I pull off at an exit and pump gas and there's a McDonald's there at 1:15 in the morning, I can drive to McDonald's, I can get a hot hamburger, French fries, and a drink to keep me on the road. If we mandate that every McDonald's pays $10 or $12 an hour to an employee, is that McDonald's going to be open for me at 1:15 in the morning when I need to get a cup of coffee or when I need to be able to eat on a trip? Those unseen circumstances are significant when we start talking about wage controls. And it's tempting to say, hey, government, let's just impose a minimum wage that's $10 or $12 an hour. But what we never see is the unintended consequences that impact teens being able to get jobs, that impact the service sector being able to, that's working on very tight margins to be able to serve us as customers at off times to be available to us. If a manufacturing job is supportable at $9 an hour. The legislature requiring that they pay $10 or $12 an hour for their employees simply just passes the cost of the goods that are produced onto the people that are buying them. That's an unseen circumstance, but when you look at it in the marketplace, anything we impose politically has an unintended consequence that all too often is much broader than we would expect, and I think in the end has a detrimental impact on us as a state.
I want to add one thing. As far as the question, I'm not exactly sure, like Dr. Rett said, if that would affect, the health care. But what I will say as far as the minimum wage is that what people really need to realize, and they really don't know, that minimum wage is $5.15 an hour. And that is extremely low. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that we need to raise it to $10, $12, $15. I'm not going to say that that's what we need to raise it to, but I do believe that it needs to be raised more than $5.15. When I was in high school and I worked at Wendy's, that's how much I got paid. And I was excited about that, of course, and I could maybe pay my cell phone bill, and that's pretty much all. But $5.15 is really extremely low for anyone, even if you're living on your own, if you don't have children. So I do believe that $5.15 is very low, and people don't even know that even though the federal minimum wage is higher than that, in the state of Georgia, $5.15 is just not unacceptable.
Okay. Let's move on to another area. We have a lot of questions about transportation, and most of these seem to be dealing with the metropolitan Atlanta area. So if we could group some of these questions together, it would be: transportation is a problem. What do you think the state can do to help? What are the possible solutions? Where will the money come from? So, Mr. Setzler, let's see if we can start with you on this transportation question.
I think there's broad consensus across the parties that we need more dollars for infrastructure spending. And it's interesting, I was at a breakfast this morning where the governor, the lieutenant governor, and the speaker all spoke, and they both emphasized a key priority right now is infrastructure spending for transportation. I think with that kind of focus, I think the approach of taking a steady walk in the same direction can accomplish great things. I think that's true. I think most of us recognize that in our lives, that when we're committed to something steadily over time, you can have a big impact. My recommendation for transportation spending is that as we look at the revenue growth projections over the coming years, we're seeing 4 to 5% revenue growth projected as a state. We do have a growing population. There's certain formula funding that we need to maintain for schools and for Medicaid and so forth. But above that, I think if we spend 25% of all new monies that come in, for example, on infrastructure funding, and we begin to shift taxes that are available to the general fund to be spent by the legislature, if we can step down our tax rate gradually over 5 years, and as they're stepped down in the same year, raise the motor fuel tax, the excise tax on motor fuels, it can really be a shift without a tax cut, without a tax increase, really a shift from general fund revenues to earmarked transportation revenues, so that the dollars that the DOT has to spend on roads and bridges can be increased over the course of 5 or 6 years to meet our funding needs. I think that's job one. And I think we can do that and still service our formula-funded programs. I think we can still do that and fully fund the quality basic education funding formula. But we can't do it by spending on all the other nice-to-haves that come walk by. I think we've got to fund QBE for schools. We've got to fund the Medicaid expansion we have the Medicaid growth we have in headcount. And if we fund those things as priorities, we'll have money to set aside to fund transportation without a tax increase, but that can still meet our needs over the course of 5 or 6 years. I think that approach is how we should proceed as a state. I think that'll be part of the discussion this year. And I think a steady walk in the same direction can get us far. I think it's the way we can solve our infrastructure needs.
Widening roads is not necessarily an answer to our traffic needs. Where I live at, it used to be country. There used to be deer roaming around, chipmunks, Coyotes. But when they built the East-West Connector, the only thing I see roaming now are automobiles. And it's kind of hard to find a deer. Some people talk about maybe an excise tax on the gas while gas prices are down. But if gas prices go back up to what they were, then we feel that in our pocket. Some people talk about perhaps a T-splosh, transportation splosh, or maybe more of a fractional T-splosh that might adequately fund our specific needs. But somewhere along the line, we're going to have to pretty much have a frank, sincere conversation about our transportation needs moving forward, because, and we're going to have to look at all alternatives. That's going to have to be important. When you mention that, some people frown up about that, but moving forward in the one of the things that brought the Olympics here was the selling point was the MARTA rail, because you were able to move people around. I worked for the Secretary General from Tanzania when I was here, and I saw the large amount of people every day moving around. And I said to myself, can you imagine all those people driving cars to get to the venues? It would have been a nightmare. It would have been gridlock. So I think we're going to have to take, we are going to, as Ed said, going to have to take a good look at how we're going to fund it. But we need to have a sincere conversation as how we want to shape this growth as we move forward. Do we want just all automobiles? Just like when I was driving here, there was an accident, I think it was on 285. I-20 was blocked, I-85 was blocked, the side roads were blocked. One good accident can turn the whole city into gridlock. And moving forward, I think we're just going to have to have a frank conversation. But when we do that, we want to make sure that we tailor it to each community's specific needs. Because what they want in DeKalb may not fit what we want here in Cobb. What they may want in Fulton may not adequately reflect our specific needs here. So moving forward, we're going to have to take a look at our needs and be realistic and practical, and also take a close look at funding, because that's something that's going to be with us. Once you put that in place, that funding mechanism, it's not like you can just turn off a switch and stop it right away.
I think that transportation is one of the top priorities, definitely here in Georgia. We have, excuse me, I'm sorry. When you look at it, the way that it's funded now is that if we work on a road today, we won't be able to repair that road or rebuild that road for 100 years. That is ridiculous. Some of the things that, you see 285, you see 20, our roads need to be repaired at least every 10 years. These are things that we have to really think about. And it's a really hard question to answer, because everybody wants to fix transportation, but nobody wants to raise taxes. When you hear the word raise taxes, everybody's like, no, 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 no. But at the same time, in order to grow, we lose so much money every year just in traffic. The economy loses money for the time that we sit in traffic. People could be out shopping and buying things to grow Georgia. And those are things that we have to take into consideration. We have to fix the traffic system. And we have to have an adequate conversation about raising the tax. And that's just being frank. If we want to be able to fix the transportation system, we're going to have to get the money from somewhere. And I hate to say it, but it's going to have to come from the tax.
Thank you. I've heard a lot of press about 1 cent of our gas tax is not going to the roads. It's actually going into the general fund. Do you support that, or do you think it should be reversed? I think we're starting with Dr. Rhett now.
Well, if we're collecting a tax and it's supposed to be specifically earmarked towards transportation, I think that's where it needs to go. One of the committees I sat on for a number of years here in Cobb County was the T-Splosh Transportation Oversight Committee, where we looked at the money that was collected and made sure it was adequately allocated to what it was earmarked to go to. I'm not quite familiar with this particular tax, but I remember reading about that it does go in the general fund, but once it's in the general fund, it could be used for other programs instead of what is specifically geared for if it was collected to be geared towards transportation. But moving forward, if we're going to collect any tax, we need to make sure that the revenue that's collected from that is specifically put aside and utilized for what it's intended. It's just like, if you have a budget and you have so much allocated for your rent, for your water bill, gas, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to be playing shell games, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the hopes that revenue can continue to come in and cover what is intended for.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, please.
Well, when it comes to the 1% that you're talking about, I have been reading a few things about it. But what I will say is that I want to look into that a little bit more before I would comment on that.
Thank you. Mr. Setzler, please.
It's, I intend to file legislation in the next 3 or 4 legislative days that does that. I've got a bill I'm working with some other House members on to address the transportation needs in a very similar way to what I described a moment ago. To put in perspective for folks, just so we know what we're talking about, the gasoline is taxed with a per gallon excise tax, and then sales taxes are also applied to it. The sales tax, 3 of the 4 cents of the state sales tax goes to transportation. 1 penny goes to the general fund to be spent on schools, prisons, universities, everything else. The 1 penny that's being discussed is, should that penny, which equates to about $190 million a year, let's call it $200 million a year of money, should that penny go to the general fund, or should that penny be committed to transportation only? The state budget for state funds is about $20 billion, $21 billion. At the revenue growth that's projected per year of 5%, think about adding $1 billion of new money each year to cover all the things we want to spend in addition to the previous year. So if it's 21 this year, it'll be 22 next year, and so forth. So of the $1 billion of new money that comes in each year to supplement what's now a $20 billion budget, of that $1 billion, should we divert $200 million, 1/5 of it, to be for transportation purposes only? Or should we leave it in the general fund to be spent on all the other things we spend money on, schools, prisons, highway patrol, those kinds of things? I believe that 20%, about $200 million a year of new money each year, needs to be committed to transportation, so that over the course of 6 years, what would be $200 million the first year, 400 after 2 years, 600 after 3 years, and so on. After 6 years, we could build a pool of $1.2 billion per year that could be committed to only transportation. We do that by committing 20% of all new money to transportation and spending 80% of all new money on things like schools and highway patrol and prisons and those kinds of things. That's the steady walk in the same direction I think we need to take, and I believe that by 2017 we ought to be setting that last penny aside for transportation purposes only, because I think it's a key part of moving in the direction that we need to go.
Thank you. Hopefully you can help me with this question a little bit. We have a few questions on Senate Bill 6, and this is about the Georgia Road Safety Driver's License Integrity Act. Apparently this Senate Bill 6 is to close it's called a loophole here, for some drivers to get driver's licenses when they are here illegally. Do you know anything about that?
There is a loophole that allows people who are in the country illegally to get a valid state driver's license. I would just ask the people in the audience, does it make sense if someone's in this country illegally that they be able to get a valid Georgia driver's license as if they were a Georgia citizen? Okay, we can take a show of hands. I believe it makes sense. We can debate our national immigration policy all we want to. That is a separate question. But if they are here illegally, I believe they ought not be able to get a valid driver's license as if they were a Georgia citizen. So there is a loophole that needs to be closed. I think the only debate that's happening over that is really a debate that's almost a surrogate debate to really debate the national immigration policy. But I think most fair-minded people would recognize that if someone's not here illegally, they shouldn't be able to get a valid driver's license, and that's what SB 6 seeks to address.
I agree with him, but what's the alternative to getting a wreck with somebody who doesn't have a driver's license or insurance? You know, so then there's also a mechanism to try and track a person who's driving who shouldn't be here, because if they get into an accident and they have a license, the police can pretty much figure out if they have any business here in this country or not. I agree with what he said, but I think from a comprehensive standpoint, we need to look at the broader picture, because sometimes simple answers don't create simple solutions. They create more problems. So I think that we have to really take a look at, well, what's the alternative? How do we address that? Do we have them? Because I've known people who've been hit by another vehicle, and the person was, number one, illegally in this country, number two, had no driver's license, and number three, didn't have any insurance. So any legislation, I think, is going to have to take a look at that from a comprehensive viewpoint, because one simple solution doesn't mean that that problem goes away. Sometimes part of the problem goes away, but it creates more problems. And until you've been hit by a car with someone without insurance or a driver's license, and your insurance has to pay for it, and then eventually, guess whose insurance goes up, you know? So I agree with what Ed said, but I think we have to be a little more sober and broader in our approach to it.
Thank you. Any comments, please, Ms. Thomas?
Well, unfortunately, it's just my second day, so I haven't reviewed Senate Bill 6 yet. So I really can't comment on it like I would like to, because I like to review things all the way through, because sometimes it might say one thing and then be for something else. So I really can't comment on that bill. One thing I can comment on is the very complexity of giving someone a driver's license, but they can't have a tag, but they can't have insurance. It's just really kind of complicated. So what I have heard is that they can get insurance, but they can't get a tag, but then now we're trying to give them a license. So it's just a very complicated kind of bill. So I would love to review that bill. I'll probably do that tomorrow and get back to you, because I mean, it's very complicated.
And I would say I'm not commenting on Senate Bill 6, which I've not read. I was commenting generally on the issue that you raised. There may be some details in Senate Bill 6 I'm not aware of that could kind of spur me to think otherwise.
Right. We have another related question that you can tell me if this is a valid question. Some believe that if you're here illegally and you do have a driver's license, that enables you to access entitlements which cost Georgia billions of dollars. Are you aware of how having a driver's license would entitle you to benefits that you wouldn't have otherwise?
We could discuss that. I'd ask if we could take another question.
Okay, thank you. And I think we will finish with transportation on, there are some of our audience that has an interest in high-speed trains. And do you think that Georgia would benefit from a network of high-speed trains from Atlanta to other parts of Georgia? And one of our audience specifically thinks that there are new commercial and housing developments that are going up in northeast Cobb. Are there any plans to have any MARTA rail or any rail that far out in the suburbs? So let's see, where are we? Start with Dr. Rhett. So the question is, what are your thoughts on high-speed rail, both in Cobb County and across the state of Georgia?
Well, there's different type of rails. The type of rail system you have with MARTA pretty much stops more frequently at a lot of different stops within its area. But the type of rail she's talking about is one that a major metropolitan area has to take a look at, where it might stop at Marietta, might stop at Kennesaw, might stop at, I'm just saying, Dahlonega, and then Chattanooga, or go out west to towards Athens and then beyond. A metropolitan area like this, you have to have more than just roads as your means of transportation. You have to have something offset it, like as commuter rail. And like I said, there's different types of rail, but what she's talking about is not specifically like the current MARTA system, but one that makes infrequent stops, but it stops at different towns and helps to offset the traffic. Just like if you were coming in from Chattanooga, you could probably come down, I'm just throwing a name out there, let's say maybe Dahlonega, park your car, get off, catch the rail, stop at Kennesaw, Marietta, and then you're in downtown Atlanta. And also that not only helps to alleviate some of the traffic, but even sometimes some of the hazards that create traffic when people are tired, sleepy, got a Java jolt. But of course, it's going to come down to funding. But whether you're building roads or building a rail system, that maintenance, that's going to come into place. That's going to be up for debate how to fund it. But I can envision that as we move forward, and that's something we're going to have a frank talk about, because being the size of the metropolitan area we are, that conversation is going to come up, and it's going to be some practical conversation about it, and whether you're against it or for it, instead of saying yes or no, we have to engage in a conversation and see how we're going to shape it, because that's just the future, and it's a good possibility that will take place.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, please.
Well, I'm not an expert on the different kinds of railroads like Dr. Rhett, but what I will say is that I am open to anything that will help our transportation system and help traffic, and so that people can get to and from work and be able to get access to their jobs to get there on time so that they can work efficiently. I am open to that. At the same time, I would definitely have to look into see, more about high-speed railroads and see how that helps the economy, how it affects the economy. I would like to look into that and see what effects that would have on Georgia.
Thank you. Mr. Setzler?
I think the polls that are out there that suggest citizen interest in rail transit tap into something. I think they tap into a sentiment that if there was a train or a rail solution that started near my house and took me near where I needed to go, I'd like to ride it. I think that's a fair sentiment. I think it's the general sentiment of the public. The challenge is when you overlay the economic realities of making that happen on top of it. A rail solution is $100 million a mile to $150 million a mile cost. We've got an inner city transportation system in this country today. It's completely self-funded. It doesn't require federal subsidy. It's high speed from city to city, and people get together and they ride in the same vehicle from city to city, and it's called commercial aviation. It's called an airplane. It's very efficient from a resource perspective. And Delta flying from Atlanta to Charlotte, AirTran flying from Atlanta to Charlotte is a completely self-funded thing. It doesn't require, aside from maintaining the airport, which is a very low-cost infrastructure-wise, and most of that's funded by the airlines. The trip itself from Atlanta to Charlotte is completely commercially viable. It's funded completely by the passengers. Intercity rail in this country, with a couple exceptions in the Northeast where there's the population density to support it, is a fantastically publicly subsidized enterprise. Meaning the people in this room who are not on a train trip today would be funding 75 to 80% of every trip, even though we're sitting here and not on the trip. Transit within metropolitan areas nationwide is between 75 and 80% subsidized by non-riders. Farebox covers only 20 to 25%. So intercity transportation, we have a fantastic system today. It's called our air system. It's faster than rail, it's cheaper than rail, and it's completely self-sufficient. Why would we want to put public dollars into a system, to support a system that's not publicly sustainable when we have one that is? The places where rail is sustainable are places where rails were built in the time before airplanes. In the Northeast, where there's great population density, and intercity rail existed back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, those are the places where it's economically viable. It's not economically viable here, and it never will be. Why would we want to move back in technology when we've got something that serves us well already? Lastly, I would say for the metro area, of the top 400 metropolitan areas in the world, Atlanta is the least dense, has the lowest population density of any of the top 400 metropolitan areas in the world. We're the worst possible candidate for fixed guideway or rail transportation within our metropolitan area of any city in the world. It's not the solution for us. We need to move, as Europe is, away from rail, more towards cars. But we need to be smarter about how we manage our road network so we're not snarled in traffic.
One of the things that corporations and companies look at when they move to an area is, do people have access to get to work in a timely manner? They take a good look at that. They look at the whole transportation system. If you have a transportation system where one accident occurs and it ties up the whole city, they take a look at that. So Ed is correct, and as I said earlier, we have to look at whatever type of transportation we look at, we're going to have to look at the funding mechanism, but I don't think we should necessarily rule out any alternatives as we move forward.
I might add as well, though, if you think about the actual cost, what serves an area like Cobb County, for 8 miles of rail line, which is about $1 billion, at $125 million a mile, for 8 miles of rail line, we could buy 4,000 15-passenger vans. Now, you think about the community that you live in personally. What's going to serve you as a senior citizen better, getting to the doctor or getting to the hospital or getting to where you go in your life? A 15-passenger van that can pick you up and take you there? Or a rail spine in Cobb County that's in downtown Marietta and runs downtown? Unless you live on that spine, it's not going to serve you well. Cobb County is much better served with a paratransit system that mirrors CCT or perhaps expands CCT and makes it touch more of our community. A expensive central spine of transit doesn't serve Cobb County well, and candidly doesn't serve the metro well. So I think we can spend our dollars smarter in ways that serve us better.
Thank you. We have another question. This question is on law enforcement being equipped with body cameras, that is House Bill 32. What is your position on the law enforcement body cameras, and where do you think the money should come from if you support that? Let's see, Ms. Thomas.
I think that the issue with having body cameras is not the money that it costs to get the body cameras, it's the money that it costs to store the information. When you have a police officer that works a 12-hour shift and he has a body camera on him for 12 hours, it costs money to store the information, and for 12 hours worth of worth of footage. So I think that that's one of the biggest costs that we need to look into, because people think it's a quick solution, like let's put a camera on them, but we have to understand that it costs a lot of money to store that data. Secondly, we do have cameras on the cop cars, as well. And I don't know if that is the solution to what is going on in America, or what people, are the perception of things that are going on right now. I don't know if body cameras are the solution. We have a lot of things that go on, and people have recorded them, and, people see it with their own eyes and with cameras, and the things are still going on. So I think that the solution is greater than just putting a camera on a police officer. I think there's a lot of different things that we need to look into in order to help the solution with what's going on in America today.
Thank you for that.
I think it's a great idea to have them. I think it's a bad idea to force it by law as a legislature. I spoke to a mayor last week who for about 3 years has had cameras on each of their police officers. There is a lot more evidence that's admissible in a court to show what really happened. And the mayor said, surprisingly, but not in a way that's hard to believe, the people their police officers encounter behave a whole lot better with cops when they recognize they themselves are being filmed. Cops being cursed at or treated kind of rudely. That's actually gone down when the citizens recognize the police officers have cameras. There's accountability on everyone. I think cities are going to increasingly start to do it. I think it's in everyone's best interest. I don't think we as the legislature need to ask to do something that cities are going to very quickly see as in their interest. I think 10 years from now, I think 98% of police officers will have cameras on them because it's in the officer's interest. I think it's in the citizen's interest. And I see the next decade making that almost ubiquitous and making it the standard. I don't think we as a legislature need to order that. If we as a legislature did order it, for example, and the camera didn't work, for example, then you've got a cause, you have a case in court against the officer. Hey, he violated his responsibility to have a camera on him. Therefore, someone that perhaps committed a crime could get out of being held accountable. I think it would create a dangerous precedent if we mandated that in law.
I agree with Ed. That mandating, I don't think that's necessary. But it does, I think it's important to have those cameras. It kind of remind me when I played varsity sports in college. And after the game, the following Monday, the coaches would sit down and ask you, well, tell me what happened. I'd blame it on the other player. I'd blame it on my teammate. I'd blame it on my horoscope. Then when he put on the film, I found out it was me. So I had to be cognizant of how I conducted myself. And I think it's just like Ed said, it also helps the police officers out. I used to work in a police precinct many years ago, and it's not an easy job. And like Ed was saying, it also, when you're on candid camera, if you're a police officer or if you're the alleged perpetrator, you kind of make sure at least you have your hair combed and you know kind of conduct yourself in a more civil manner. So I think we should have it, but like Ed said, I don't think the legislature should get in the business of mandating it.
Thank you. Let's move on to another area. This question is, what do you think should be done to improve ethics in the legislature? And do you think that lobbyists and gifts, etc., unduly influence the legislators? So let's see. I think we're with Dr. Rhett again.
Well, you have to be careful of people bearing gifts, no matter where you're at. But you know, just like tomorrow, I have to take a small course in ethics in the legislature, and there's certain things that might be etiquette in a different arena, whereas in the legislature, it may cross the line. Just like if someone takes me out to dinner and pays for my dinner, and I say, oh, thank you. But then comes out the dinner was over, is it $75? All of a sudden I crossed the line. I didn't know that, you know. We have to make sure everybody is accountable to ethics in the highest manner, and we have a lot of people put their trust in us. And if we're not ethical, you know, what does that say to the whole system? So I think it's appropriate, and it's necessarily that we all kind of, you know, in the Air Force, we periodically have a refresher course every year on certain things. And some people think it's mundane, but then when a situation comes up and they have to utilize that type of skill that we had to refresh ourselves over, it comes automatically. It's like, oh, they know what to do. They don't have to think about it. And the same thing with ethics, just that review and know where the lines and boundaries are. It gives legislature a means of control to know what they're doing and conduct themselves accordingly. Just like our core values in the Air Force, integrity, service to others before self, and excellence is all we do. That's something we need to have ingrained in our legislative core.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas, please.
I think that ethics is very, very important. You know, one thing I did learn yesterday when I got sworn in, you know, when we were sworn in and we had our hand on the Bible, a lot of things that we said at that swearing in, you know, were a part of good ethics. And I think that we do have to have that check and balance. And I think that the Ethics Commission is there to make sure that we're held accountable. And again, just like Dr. Rhett said, we are here for the people that voted for us, the people that trust us every day to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And I think that the ethics helps us to make sure that we're making those right decisions and doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we, if if people knew how far Georgia had come, even the last 10 years, I think they'd be very proud. If you knew how far Georgia had come in the last 30 years, I think it would take your breath away. How little transparency there was 30 years ago, 20 years ago. No one wants to be complacent, but I do think the procedures we have in place are about what they need to be. I do think there need to be limits on lobbyist gifts. But I will tell you, so often there's such a focus on lobbyists that the way our laws are crafted, if a lobbyist takes a legislator to dinner and buys them a Chick-fil-A sandwich and an orange juice for $4.60, that's disclosed, and it should be. I think it's great. The challenge is that doesn't close the loop. It's very salacious to talk about lobbyists. These people who are paid to influence elected officials. Well, there are people who are not lobbyists, who are completely unlimited in what they can do for elected officials. They have no reporting requirements, just a regular citizen. A regular citizen can come give a fantastic gift to an elected official, but if they're not paid to be a lobbyist, there's no disclosure requirement whatsoever. So I think the idea that we put these ethics laws in place, that it's a panacea, or that we could ever pass a law that's tough enough to box in everything, it's really an impossible task. I think what we have today, in 2005, we passed an ethics package that put us, of the 50 states, we had the 5th toughest ethics law in the country. I think other states kind of caught up with us. I think we passed something year before last that got us in the top 5. I think we're about where we need to be. And I think we need to continue to focus on openness and disclosure of what's done so that citizens can immediately figure out what their elected officials are doing. And I do think we need to maintain a level of independence in our ethics commission. So if there are investigations, elected officials can't put their fingers on those and twist those. There have been some allegations in the press. That's been the case. It may have happened. It may not have happened. I honestly do not know. But I do think there needs to be a level of independence with the Ethics Commission, that they can pursue cases and let the public know what's happening.
Thank you. We're actually getting a little bit short on time, so I think we're just going to have another question or two and let you all have some closing comments. But I did want to mention a couple things that I'm not going to ask as a question due to shortage of time. One comment is that rest areas along the interstate are not always in great shape, and there's some concern for improving those and improving our image for the state of Georgia. We have another question about specifically the East Marietta Library and how it needs to be rebuilt, and a lot of specifics on walking distance from schools, etc. Anyway, the concern is if the state has a vote on the East Marietta Library, we would appreciate that support. This question I'm interested in. We've gotten a lot of bad publicity in Georgia about our delays in processing, and this question says Medicaid applications. I'm not sure if it's just Medicaid applications, but we've seen a lot of publicity on overtime and trying to catch up. So this question is, how do you think we should fix that problem of the delays in processing those applications? Ms. Thomas, please.
Wow. So I'm just now hearing about this Medicaid, but what I want to say is this. We need to make sure that we have oversight on things like this. If people are filling out applications for their Medicaid, we have to make sure that the people that are processing these applications are held accountable. People need their health care again, and they need it now. And if they're getting held up 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, it's unacceptable. So we have to make sure that there's a check and balance there. From the secretary that sits at the desk that takes in the application or checks it online, all the way up to the supervisor that supervises the person that accepts the application. We have to make sure there's checks and balances when it comes to that. Because again, healthcare is very, very, very important. And if people are filling out their applications and they're qualified and they can get Medicaid, we have to make sure that these people are getting their Medicaid and getting it on time.
Thank you. Mr. Setzler, please.
It's leadership and resources. In 2007 or 8, we separated the Department of Driver Services out as its own separate agency. Then Governor Perdue recognized what a terrible job we did at issuing driver's licenses, and wanted to have an agency that's their sole purpose was being in the driver's license management issuing business. And as a result, they really have increased the service that you get. I don't know if there's a resource question. I know a lot over the last 10 years, the ups and downs of the economy, as we've squeezed agencies, we've protected public education. As much as people talk about the cuts of K-12 education, we cut the education budget a fraction of what other departments were cut. And that often led to low staff in areas of service delivery. So we need to look at areas where the public interacts with the government, and there is no excuse just because it's a state agency that people aren't served well and served immediately. So there may be a resource issue there. That may be part of it, but the other part is leadership. It's got to be important to our state agencies to treat our constituents and our citizens as customers, not as captives. I mean, I cannot overstate the importance of leadership. And I think if we as a state are committed to that, it's not good enough to say that, hey, these people are getting a service that's free, let them stand in line. That's unacceptable. Leadership and resources have to be brought to bear so we treat them like customers, not like captives. So,
Okay. Dr.
I would
Rex.
probably need to take an independent, systematic review of the program and how it's implemented. And once we take that systematic review, look at seriously trying to implement it, a lot of times what happens in these bureaucracy is just that, the bureaucracy itself. And even if you put a person in leadership to try and make that change, they have a hard time navigating through the bureaucracy because it's in place and been there for a long time. But just like any other program, once you take that systematic, independent review, not let them review themselves, once we get the recommendations, we need to move forward and act on them and try and speed up the turnaround on that, make it more efficient. Because after all, when people fill out an application because they're in need of support of their health, it's not like they're waiting around at a restaurant for a short order. You know, they want it kind of like Burger King, their way, and they want it right away because it's urgent. And it's important that we make sure that customers are satisfied.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to stop our questions. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to make any closing remarks that you'd like to. And so this time, let's start on the opposite side, where we started with the opening remarks with you, Mr. Setzler.
I'd like to thank the organizations that put this on tonight. I look forward to being here each year. I wish we had more legislators that are able to make it. Sometimes during session, it makes it hard for them to make it in an evening. But I appreciate you all being here, being part of this. I want to say that our state government is not seeking to attract attention. Legislators are not, and perhaps some are, but most of the members that are serving down there are regular members of our community who care enough to put their name on the ballot, to get involved, to give of themselves personally and financially. It costs money to serve in the legislature. It's a strain on family time and on professional development for young people. And I want to let you know that the subtext you might see in the paper of elected officials enriching themselves and living the life of Riley on the taxpayer does that makes for good newspaper, but it's just not the reality. People in both parties are committed, hardworking people that are trying to do the right thing by their neighbors, which is us, the citizens. So when you see things, try to look past the histrionics and the stories of hyperbole, because most folks are in the legislature. 95, 96, 98% of people are trying to do the right thing. With that in mind, I will tell you that I'm personally committed, as I know the other folks in this panel are, to focusing on the important questions. And I think the important questions for our state this year and 10 years from now will continue to be education, infrastructure, and sound governance, where we maintain a free society in a state where people can maximize their freedom, maximize their opportunity for themselves and their kids. If we do that, we do right by that, we will find ourselves to be really a leading state. Don't believe the press that says Georgia's bad at everything. We are not only the #1 state in which to do business, we've shown an ability to, within the Southeast, be a leader in education reform, in growth and educational achievement. People say, hey, we're 47th in education, we're bad, we're dumb, we're backwards. You know, Georgia has the 4th highest standards for for science of any state in the country. That was a couple years ago. Maybe in the last year or two, someone's begun to catch up with us. We've set very high standards as a state. We've shown a willingness to put everything on the table as a state to try to improve. Very few states have been willing to be as bold as Georgia has in improving education. Maybe some of us don't agree with everything that's been done, but the willingness to be aggressive and push ourselves to increase educational achievement has been something I think the state can be lauded for. And I think if we can continue to improve on educational choice for parents and making our existing public education system work, I think we're going to continue to be a leader. Georgia is a leader in higher education. The Hope Scholarship is almost unique in the country. It's copied by many states that can afford to do it, but few have been able to match it. I mean, the transformation we've seen in our public higher education system in the last 20 years I'm running out of time. Is really a model for the country. So I'd ask you to get involved. What we do in the state capitol is pretty boring, but it's very important, and it impacts our lives in many ways, much more so than what we see on CNN and on Fox News at the national level. Be involved, understand the issues. We're approachable. You can call any of us on our cell phone and have an impact. Your voice can be heard by policymakers the very next day at the Capitol, so be involved. Thank you for being here.
Yes, sorry to cut you off, Ms. Thomas. We're running out of time here, but we'd like to have an opportunity to have a few comments from you.
First, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for having me tonight. I'm very excited to be here. This is my second day, and I guess since I've been a state legislator, it's my first panel. So I'm excited to be here, and to all the other organizations that had us here tonight. I'm very excited to have an effective and be effective on change for Georgia. I'm very excited about that. I'm excited to be a part of the General Assembly, and we work hard every single day. When you're sleeping, we're working. When you wake up in the morning, we're working. We're working all the time to make sure that we can have a better Georgia for you and your family and for your family to come. So I want to say again, thank you, and thank you for having us come out today, because we need to have discussions like that, like this. Not only have I answered your questions, but by your questions, I have learned so much, if you only knew. You know, some of the things that you brought up tonight, I didn't have the answer for, but you have put thoughts in my mind to make me think about some of the things that I need to think about forthcoming. And so I'm excited about that. Thank you so much for your intriguing questions and making me think a little bit harder on some of the things that Georgia really, really needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Rett, please.
I'd just like to thank you all for providing me with this opportunity. For the past 25 years, I've pretty much dedicated my life to serving community and country as an educator and a member of the United States Armed Forces. One of the things that struck me in awe when I went into the state capitol is I looked at the history and the lineage that people who served there left behind. One of the things I did in the Air Force, I used to be a career advisor where I would help people craft their career, beginning, midterm, and end. One of the things when people near the end of their career, I would ask them, tell me, what is your legacy here? And they would tell me different things. Then I'd ask them a second question that was more important. If I asked some people around here in the squadron, what is your legacy, what would they tell me? It was usually silence. I said, well, you have 2 years to work on that. And one of the reasons I took on this job is because I want to work together with my colleagues and create a lasting legacy within the confines so that people say, tell me something about Doc. They'll be able to answer right away. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We greatly appreciate your coming, participating, and allowing this opportunity to get to know you. Thank you.
Started
Did we make it?